Hello Year 7. Today we are going to be starting a new topic, and that is called percentages. It's very likely you will have done some work on percentages in your previous school, perhaps in Year 5 or Year 6. So I am hoping that today we'll recap some of the knowledge that you perhaps already have, and will set us off on the right track for moving forward in this topic. So I'm going to take a little bit of time just to explain what a percentage is, and then our objective for today is to work out percentages using a mental method. So make sure you copy all of this down into your book as if this was an ordinary lesson. So I've already said at the side, a percentage is a number out of 100, and it is often written using this symbol here, and that is the percentage symbol. Now, I tend to think of when you are working out percentages using a mental method as kind of a building block approach. There are some very important percentages that if you know how to work those out, you can then use these rules to find more complicated percentages. And the rules that we're going to look at today and build upon are rules for 50%, 25%, 10%, 5%, and the rule for 1%. And it might be you are sat there listening to this video thinking, I already know all the rules for these, sir. To which point I would say, great, that is fantastic. So I'm going to go through each of these rules and do an example of each of these rules, and then I'm going to show you how we can use these to make more complicated percentages. So the rule for 50%, well, 50% is half of something. So if you want to find 50% of a number, you need to halve it. So I'm going to put at the side of my little building block or brick, halve it. Okay? So for example, if I wanted to do 50% of, let's say, £40, all I need to do is take my 50% and do half of it. And half of 40 is 20. So the answer to 50% of £40, I would halve it, and that is £20. Okay, 25% is my next little rule. And some of you might know that 25% is equivalent to a quarter. So for 25%, the rule that I usually use is I find 50% by halving it, and then I halve again. So I'm going to write for my little rule, halve it, and halve again. Now, I'm sure there'll be one or two of you sat there saying, sir, you've spelt half wrong. Half, H-A-L-F, and you've spelt it V-E. Well, if you're really interested, I will explain at the end of this video what the difference is between half with a V-E and half with an F. But that's more of an English subject. So, imagine that I wanted to do 25% of, let's say, 32 grams. The way that I would do this is I would halve 32, and I would halve that answer again. So half of 32 is 16, and half of 16 is 8. Another approach for 25%, if you prefer, is yes, 25% is a quarter, so you could divide by 4. Okay, 10%. Well, since 10% make the whole thing 100%, the rule for 10% is divide by 10. So, if I want to find 10% of a number, let's try something a little bit more challenging. Let's say I wanted to do 10% of 85 metres. Well, I would need to divide 85 by 10. And when we divide by 10, we move all the digits one place to the right. So 85 divided by 10 would be 8.5. Okay, 3 rules down. Let's keep moving. The next rule is 5%. Okay, well, we've just done a rule for 10%, and since 2 5% make 10%, all I need to do is find my answer for 10% and do half of that. So this time I am going to use a half with an F. So I'm going to say it is half of 10%. So let's do a quick example of that one. 5% of, this time let's have 90 grams. Well, if I wanted to do 10%, I would divide by 10. And 90 divided by 10 is 9. And then I would need to do half of 9. And half of 9 is 4.5. So the answer to that one would be 4.5 grams. Okay, finally, the rule for 1%. Well, 1%, there are 100 of those in 100%. So the rule for this is divide by 100. So again, let's do an example. If I wanted to do 1% of, let's have 750 kilometres, I would have to do 750 divided by 100. And again, when we divide by 100, we are moving the number 2 places. So this becomes 7.5. Don't need the 0 on the end. 7.5 kilometres. Okay, so those are the 5 essential rules to being able to work out any percentages. So do make sure you've copied these down. If I've gone too fast, pause the video, get these copied down. Okay, what I'm going to do now is show you how you can use these to work out some more complicated percentages. Maybe you thought 75% should have been a rule. Well, I'm going to show you that you can do 75% using my rules. So I'm just going to move my book up slightly. And I'm going to do a further 3 examples. So I'm going to do 75% of, let's do 84 meters. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And let's have 30% of 310 pounds. And let's do a really nasty one. 95% of 800. And let's have grams for that one. Now, for each of these percentages, there is going to always be perhaps one or more ways of building up these percentages. But this is why I call these 5 the building blocks. Because if I want to find 75% of a number, I could use some of my building blocks that build up to make that 75%. So for example, if I want 75% of a number, I could get my answer to 50%. I could get my answer to 25% and put those things together to make 75% altogether. So going back to my rule, 50% is half of your number, which is 42. If I want 25%, it is half of that number again, which is 21. So I know if I put these numbers back together, that would be the same as 75%. And if I add that together, that is 63 meters. Now, how do you build up 30%? Well, you might decide I could do 25%, I could do 5%. I personally would use the building block for 10%. But I'm going to need 3 of those. Because 10%, 10% and 10% make 30% altogether. So let's think about what 10% of this number is. Divide by 10, 31. So each 10% is 31. Adding all of those up to get my 30% is £93. Okay, so how would you do something complicated like 95%? You might be thinking, let's do a 50%, let's do a 10%, a 10%, a 10%, a 10%. That's got me up to 90. Oh, and another 5%. And that would work. It would involve a lot of work, but it would work. There's actually an easier way of doing this. Because 95% is 100%, the whole thing. Take away 5%. So if I can work out what 5% is, I could take that value and knock it off the 800, and that will work out 95% for me. So let's think about that. How do I do 5%? Well, let's go back and look at my rule. It's half of 10%. 10% is dividing by 10. So I'll divide by 10, and that would be 80. I would do half of that, and that would be 40. So if 5% is 40, if I knock that 40 off, I will have 95%. So I now know that 95% is 800, take away the 40, 760 grams. Okay, so those are some examples which will help you out with the activity. Do go back and look at my instructions onto what I would like you to do next. But I've not forgotten, why is it half? Why is it half? Right, the halve with a VE on the end is a verb, and the half with an F is a noun. So for example, if I had, yes, I love them, pizzas, and I was to chop it in half, I'm not sure why I would chop it in half because I'd want to eat the whole thing myself, but if I was to chop it in half, the physical act of chopping it would be halving with a V. But if I then took one of those pieces, which is the noun, that would be a half with an F. So there we go, a quick little English lesson. Okay, so do have a look at the task that I'm going to set you. If you have any problems, do keep in touch, folks, and I'm signing out. Goodbye.